Benvenuto a casa, mi bella amica.
Merci beaucoup, mon bel ami.
So, we both just had the opportunity to break out our passports and cross some borders. In fact, Jeff, you just got home from Europe yesterday.
I did, and my luggage should make it home today.
Well, such is the way of the globetrotter, my friend. But your camera's home with you, which is good, right? And it's filled with amazing images.
Yes, it is. And it looks like you had fun in Canada.
I did. We had a wonderful trip with a few good photo opportunities. We should photocombobulate our adventures.
Condividiamo I racconti dei nostri viaggi.
I went to some of the most incredible mountains in the world where I drank glacial meltwater and chomped on poutine.
And I explored several of the world's oldest cities where I drank wine and feasted on delicious meats.
Let's share what we learned in our travels.
Oh, there was so much to learn. I'm Jeff Carlson.
And I'm Mason Marsh. Let's photocombobulate. Hey Jeff, welcome home. Welcome home. I know you're a little bit jet lagged, so I appreciate you being awake this morning. I had such a great time on my trip, and I know you had a wonderful time on your trip. I thought it would be a great episode if we just kind of shared some of the lessons we learned in our travels. We don't necessarily need to recount everything we did, but I learned quite a bit. You know, we talk about travel photography a lot on this podcast, and I've traveled before, but every time I come back, I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
You know, I learned some lessons. So, yeah, I'm sure you've got some lessons to share. I've got a few. So I thought maybe we would take some time to share some stories and give some tips of wisdom that we earned in our travels on these trips that we did.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, hopefully I'm not going to fall asleep mid podcast because I am pretty jet lagged and like I was going really good this morning and now it's like starting to fade just a little bit.
Yeah, so we'll make this quick.
We learned a lot. Bye, everybody. No, but it's, I mean, you know, we can talk about this stuff a lot, and we have, and we've talked about clothing and gear and travel and all that stuff. But, you know, at some point, what's a good metaphor? You know, the rubber hits the road, like reality intrudes, and you find yourself with maybe, you know, more gear than you needed or less gear. You know, needed something that, you know, when you're, like in my case, you're in the middle of France and you realize that you don't have a blower to get the big sensor dust splotch off of your sensor. Mm-hmm. And so now I have a whole bunch of shots that I love, but I'm going to have to go and clone out this sensor spot, right? And, you know, we talked to Scott Kelby about travel photography, and that was always like really, really strong in my head. And there are lots of lessons that I learned from that. But, you know, there comes that point where, all right, now you're actually doing the thing. And how do you adapt? And what do you do when you're there at, you know, 4:30 a.m. trying to make a good shot?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
so much to photocombobulate. And what I think is cool is, we both went on trips at, you know, roughly the same time. We had some overlap. But, you know, yours was completely different from mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure we're going to have different lessons, or maybe we'll just have the same lessons. Like,
I think we probably have some
bring a
commonalities.
camera? That's a good idea. Let's bring a camera.
Well, yeah, let's review real quick for folks who don't know. I did a 10-day trip with my family. Both of our trips, by the way, were family vacations, not photo excursions, right?
Right.
So I did a 10-day trip in a camper van from Portland, our home, up to the Canadian Rockies, specifically Jasper and Banff National Parks in Alberta, Canada.
Oh, such a great area.
It was absolutely stunning. Absolutely. Almost every turn I would just be like, oh my God. You know, and I'm a guy who's seen some amazing mountains. I've lived in Alaska. I've lived in the Northwest most of my life. And, you know, big mountains aren't new to me, but these were a whole nother level. And, you know, I've even hiked the Tetons, and I thought those were like as good as it gets, but these were even better than the Tetons, and I can't believe I'm saying that. But we did this 10-day trip, and it was in a camper van, so we were camping. We did a couple of nights in a hotel. We had a lot of rain. We had, kind of the usual family vacation challenges, but it was a really, really nice trip, and we got a lot of great memories and some good photos. I got a few good opportunities to make some photos, and so for me, I'm satisfied with the trip. I definitely didn't come home thinking, man, that was a lot of work for no good photos, because it wasn't really a photo trip, and so the photos, I consider those as a bonus, right?
Yeah, yeah. What would you say would be your like your percentage of photography time spent?
5%.
Yeah.
Or less. I know how much time I spent driving. I spent 60 hours driving over over 10 days. We covered 2,500 miles. And knowing that, my photography time is obviously going to be a very small percentage of the trip. But I had the camera with me a lot. As with all trips, Jeff, I think the number one lesson that I never learn, and I don't know if I will ever learn it, because it's easy for me to sit here in my office now and say, man, I wish I would have, dot, dot, dot. I never take enough photos when we're just doing family stuff. With my phone. I took a lot with my iPhone. This trip, actually, I probably took 70% of the photos I took on this trip were with my iPhone, and the other 30% were with my quote unquote real cameras. So, wow. As to harken back to our iPhone episode way back when, the iPhone 13 Pro is a very viable camera, especially in situations where the lighting is challenging and you don't have tons of time. There was lots of times in campsites, for some reason, we had lots of campsites where the sun was coming down through the trees, and so there were these hot spots and then these deep shadows. And I would take out my real camera to take photos, and they were just it was too much dynamic range. I take out the iPhone and bang, it nails it.
Yeah.
Using that deep fusion AI technology, it's getting these photos that my real camera can't get without me doing some sort of bracketing. And so when it comes to these moments that are with our families when we're not in photography mode, I wish I'd taken more pictures. And especially I was looking at your photos as you're sending them out on social media during your trip. I'm like, wow, just getting all these great photos at times where I don't know if I would be thinking about taking out my camera and making photos. And I need to do that more. I just need to, lesson number one, shoot more.
Yeah.
Not just when it's perfect.
Right. Well, because, with me, there was always a tension between like family time and photography time. Mm-hmm. And I would say for the most part, like the quote unquote photography time were times when I specifically made the effort to go shoot a sunrise. Mm-hmm. And I would say that was mostly sunrises, just because of the way our schedule was. That was the time that, I would get up at 4:00 in the morning, because it's summer, and mm-hmm. the sun would come up at like 5:20, 5:30. And that would be... Sorry, did that just ping?
No, I didn't.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Turn that focus off. So there would be times when I could just go and be the photographer alone. And that's when I would, do my sunrise shoots, my, landscapes. And on a couple of times, once in Florence, I just made a point of saying, look, I'm going to go shoot the sunset from this location. And if anybody wants to come with me, you're welcome to. And all of them were like, oh, stand around with you while you take pictures. We're going to go out to dinner. You go ahead and, march off that direction. And that was fine. But I did try to have a camera with me at all times. And every once in a while, like walking through Paris or Rome or Venice, like I had some camera where I could take pictures as I saw them. But that was very much a, sneak one here and there. Or mm-hmm. maybe if the rest of the group, they wanted to go do some window shopping, and I am not
You're a big shopper.
shopping guy. I'm not a big shopping guy. Then, I would wander around and look for, some street scenes or lights, shadow, all of that kind of stuff.
In these moments, you had your sling bag. I know you brought your Peak Design sling bag. Did you have your full kit with you, or were you just using the little X100?
So it depended on the day. Typically, so I brought two bodies. I brought my X100V, nice and compact. I brought my Fuji X-T3 with an 18 to 135 zoom lens. So that just sort of covered the entire range. And then I also had my 52 millimeter, 50 millimeter, like a Viltrox f1.4.
Right.
And if we were going to be doing something that I knew wanted to be particularly photographic, then I would bring my X-T3 and the spare lens and put that in the sling bag. But there were some days when I knew it was just going to be, let's just go see what is around in Venice, when I would just bring the X100V. And when we were starting off, I thought, like, all right, it's going to be silly to take two camera bodies. And so part of my brain was like thinking back to what excuse me. Part of my brain was thinking back to what Scott Kelby said about, like, you don't need to bring a lot of gear. Bring, your body, one lens, and a spare lens. So you have a nice sort of range of things. And that's all you really need. But I really like this X100V. And it's nice and small and compact. And so, and because it didn't take up a whole lot of space, I had room for it. So I basically alternated between those.
Okay.
And that worked out really well.
And I'm sure you shot a lot with your phone too.
I shot a lot with my phone. In fact, when you were mentioning the iPhone, I looked it up. I shot 588 photos with
that's a fair bit.
Phone. And I came back with 2,958 shots from the whole trip.
That's a lot more than me this time. Usually I beat you, but it's funny. I don't have a camera like the X100V. I've had cameras like that, the dedicated sort of fixed lens, carry around street cameras. And I find that I just don't reach for them like I do with my phone. And especially now with the iPhone 13 with the three cameras, the ultra wide, wide, and telephoto, I feel like it covers so much that a fixed lens camera like the little Fuji just wouldn't do. I'm just really inclined to grab it. Now, that said, there was a few times where I used my iPhone and I was like, man, I wish I used a, better sensor so I could make a larger image out of that or make a bigger print or something like that in the future. But most of the time it's snapshots around camp or in town or wherever we're at. Now, I brought everything on this trip. Now, I wasn't flying anywhere, so I had a camper van. So I had my big backpack in the back, and I also had a big tripod, and I brought my small shoulder bag. So I could populate the shoulder bag with a few things. And there was one hike we did in particular where I brought just the Sony A7 IV and 2 or 3 lenses in the little shoulder bag. And I knew it was only going to be a few mile hike, and I didn't need to bring the whole backpack. And as it turns out, I didn't even need everything that was in that bag. I probably could have gotten by with a single camera and a lens just on a strap. Would have been just fine.
Yeah.
But I had all this gear, and there was a couple of times where I'm really glad I had those options. One in particular, and I'll share this story because I think this is instructive. On the trip like mine, there were several excursions we did where we were out and someone else was driving us around. One was a glacier. We used this big Terra bus, this all-terrain, big crazy bus that drove up on the glacier, and we got to get out and walk around on this glacier. And it was really cool. And in that case, I brought my backpack. And I'm like, I want to be able to, if I get up on the glacier and I want to take a telephoto shot, I want to have my 100 to 400 lens. I want to have this and that. And it was way too much. I could have gotten by with a camera and 2 lenses and plus my iPhone. But I didn't know what we were going to experience. So I wanted to cover my bases. And it wasn't like I had to carry it far. I just had to get it onto this bus, which would take us to the Terra bus, which would, so we switched vehicles a few times, but it was my smaller camera backpack, so it worked. The other time I'm really glad I had it was a boat trip we did. So we went to Malign Lake, which is up in Jasper National Park. And it's a fabulous, beautiful lake, an incredible lake. But the boat takes you all the way up to the other end of the lake from where you start. And there's this very famous little island. It's a very small little island called Spirit Island. And it's got a few trees on it. And the way the lake frames it and the mountains frame it, it was actually used in a Kodachrome advertisement in the 50s, which drove tremendous amount of attention to that particular location, to the national park up there. And so, and it's one of those images that when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that 1,000 times. You know, Spirit Island and Malign Lake. It was very, very popular. I wanted to get, I've been to lots of those types of places, but usually I only go there once, and I want to get my own shot of the place. I want to take my own stab at it. And so I brought my full kit, and all we had to do was take this boat ride up there. It was funny though. When I booked the trip, I didn't know this. They weren't very good at communicating the details, but when we were on the island, we only had about 15 minutes.
Oh.
Or when we got to the island, we only had 15 minutes. And so you pull up to a dock, you disembark with all the other passengers. There's a little trail that's like 200 yards long, this little loop trail. And there's a few viewpoints along the trail that you can look across this little bay and see this island with the mountains in the background. And I raced down the trail, got set up, I knew I wanted to make long exposure. It was kind of a cloudy day and it was very moody. And I'm thinking about it on the way up there on the boat. I'm gonna go for a long exposure, blur that water, blur that sky, let everything that's moving sort of paint itself on the scene and make this really deep and moody kind of image. And so I needed lots of time to make those 30-second exposures over and over, as many of them as I could grab. And so altogether I had like 8 minutes. Once I got off the boat, hiked over there, set up, I had like 8 minutes of shooting time. And I'm really glad I had my full kit because I could just throw everything open. I'm like, okay, I need this, I need this. I wasn't fighting anything. It was all the way it should be. And I got the shot that I wanted. Even though I only had 8 minutes, I had plenty of time to get the shot that I wanted. And I got back to the boat and I was very satisfied with the whole experience. But it was one of those places where, everybody's done it. Everybody's done it differently. And I feel like I got a little bit of a different shot out of it. But you're definitely constrained. And one of the lessons I learned on this trip is when you're working with an outside company or guide or whatever, and you don't have control over your itinerary, you don't have control of your transportation, you really need to be nimble. You really need to think ahead and plan and pre-visualize so that you're on the boat and they're talking about, when we get to the island, you're going to have this much time. I'm like, oh man. So you gotta think through exactly what you're going to do. And it reminded me of back, I used to work in aerospace museums, and I've been around a lot of air show performers and been to a lot of air shows. And one of the things that air show pilots do is they stand outside and they use their hand as they're playing, and it looks silly, but they're standing there and they're pre-visualizing their whole routine in their mind using their hand as their airplane. And I remember watching these guys do this, and these are people that do this. They do these things every day during the air show season. It's like, come on, don't you know your routine? But that pre-mapping and that pre-thinking of every detail, and based on the weather conditions you've got and all these things that are variable, now I get it. I was on that boat going, okay, I'm going to get off. I'm going to get this filter. It's in that pouch right there. I'm going to have that ready to go. I don't want to put it right on the camera right now because I want to frame it up. I'm not sure which lens I'm going to choose yet. Is it going to be the 24? It's going to be the 50. And so I got there and I tried the 24 and I was like, too wide. Switch to the 50. Switch filters, switch filter adapter rings. There's all these little moving parts. I pre-thought everything. Like, do you know where everything is? Is your sensor clean? So I got the blower out. I brought my blower. So blew out the sensor. And I did it. And it was one of those things where I didn't have all day and it still worked out because I had everything I needed and I kind of thought it through. But it could have been a goat rope, right? It could have been awful. And I can imagine that there's a lot of people that go up there to get that famous photo and they realize they only got a few minutes, and they blow it because it's just not what they were thinking it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. What time of day were you there? I mean,
We did the first trip of the day because I wanted to have good light, and so we were up there, and it's June, so the sun had been up for hours, but we were up there like 10 in the morning, but it was pretty cloudy, and so it was very moody, very moody. I'm glad it was not a bluebird kind of day because it would have been a pretty standard, boring photo at that point. Everybody had seen that one. So.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found was, it's funny, like I keep mentioning this, but Scott Kelby, having him on our podcast was great. His book is very, very good that we talked about. We'll put a link in the show notes to both. But I kept sort of unintentionally violating all of his advice, and to my own to my own detriment. Is the word I'm trying to find. See, the jet lag is
it's
coming out
kicking
here.
in. Yeah, you're
kicking in.
You're
there we go. So like for example, one of the things that he recommends when you go to a brand new city, especially like Rome or Paris or whatever, is go take the cheesy bus tour where you see all the sights and you can map out what looks good and what doesn't. We had no plan for that in our schedule. And so, for example, in Paris, the morning that I decided to go shoot the Eiffel Tower from the Trocadero, which is like just right across the Seine, it's this great shot. And I took an Uber, got there early in the morning, and there's construction everywhere. And because I didn't get a chance to see that. And in fact, we were at the Eiffel Tower that previous evening, which it was cool to be at the Eiffel Tower. We actually went up to the top. Did not end up being a really good experience because there were so many people. I mean, it was just crammed with people. And I couldn't see where the Trocadero was. I didn't scope this out. So when I got there, the shot that I had in my head was just impossible. We'll put a link in the show notes to what it looked like. And so I had to really improvise because here we are. I mean, the sun is coming up. The Eiffel Tower is lit up, but they're in the middle of repainting it. And so like one of the legs is not lit up at all. And so I had to just completely throw away my preconceived idea of what I wanted, which was basically a shot that a lot of people get. But like you said, like I wanted my version of the shot.
Right.
And so I had to figure out, all right, now what am I going to do? Because I'm here. I can't just give up and walk away. And I did end up getting a shot, which I think might be one of my favorites from the trip, but it was a total fluke. Basically, there were a bunch of guys who I'm pretty sure had been up partying all night, and they came to this overlook, and one of them stood up on a pylon or some sort of tall thing, so he could like see and get a good cell phone shot above the construction fence. And I managed to snap a quick picture of him doing that, and suddenly, where I had expected to have this very classic landscape, epic sort of posed thing, instead I ended up with something that was very impromptu and has a person in it and has some character, and I had to like reorient my brain and say, oh, you know what, that's okay. Because I didn't get the shot that I wanted because I didn't do the research beforehand to figure that out. And the same thing bit me when I was in Rome. I went to go shoot the Colosseum in the morning and didn't realize that the overlook, that there's a park across the street that is usually a good overlook for that. Oh, the park was closed for some reason. And so I'm like, walking around trying to find locations of the Colosseum to shoot, because it's big, and they're also doing construction, and so just moments of frustration. And yet I think I got a half decent picture that I kind of like. I have a blog post that I'm in the middle of writing, so we can link to that possibly if it's done.
Cool.
But just that needing to be flexible and needing to realize that everything that you had in your brain can be thrown out, and then you have to remember, wait, I've got gear, I've got time, I know how to do something, and let's see what we can do. And so now I have shots that I think are, well, some shots that are different because they're not the same classic shots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were disrupted, right? So you get something
Totally
different.
disrupted, yeah.
One thing you mentioned I want to come back around on is the crowds, the people. And I was struck by this on my trip. It was just busy everywhere we went.
Yeah.
And it was one hike we did in particular that I've seen lots of photos of this particular canyon. It's in Banff National Park, and it's got this really beautiful trail that's on a boardwalk that goes out over the river, and it's one of those kind of must do things, and so of course everyone that goes there must do it. And we got up there, it was a nice day, and we had to park in like an overflow parking lot and walk an extra 3/4 of a mile to get to the trail. And it was like standing in line for miles. We were not walking freely on this trail. We were following the people in front of us. And one of the things that it did to me was it completely removed the feeling I normally get when I'm walking along a river in nature, which is this sort of like, oh, this is really nice and refreshing. And it was much more like, I need to really make sure that my kids aren't holding up the people behind us if they want to come around us, because there were people like, we're going faster, and they would come zooming around.
Yeah.
And a lot of this trail is a catwalk, so it's 3 feet wide or 4 feet wide, and that's, you can't go to the left because it's a rock, and you can't go to the right because it's the river. And it was stressful. And we got to a place where you can go through this little cave and look at a waterfall. And we stood in line to look at this, to go through this cave. We stood in line for, I don't know, half hour to do that, because it was like, it's one of the things we went up there to do. I was just really surprised. I shouldn't have been surprised by the crowds, but I was really disappointed is too strong of a word, but
Deflated.
maybe a little frustrated that I should have expected it and set my mind to it so I'd be ready for it, because the hike was not a hike. It was a crowded city walk in a natural place. So, I mean, is that what your experience too? Is just packed full of people everywhere you went?
Most of the places. It was weird. There were only 2 times that I really felt that encroachment of people. And, going to Europe at the end of June, beginning of July, like, I expected that it was going to be busy. And I would imagine, like, this whole month is just going to be even more busy and crazy. Right. So I was like, I think we sort of hit the tail end before everything really ramps up. But then there were 2 times. One was the Eiffel Tower, and a lot of that was because we had booked a tour with the expectation was this tour would get you ahead of the line. So we paid extra money that is supposed to jump the line, so you're not just like in the regular general line to get up there. And it turned out that was not the case. It was you could. I'm not even sure what the deal was, but we ended up standing. We spent a whole lot of time in line, and then once we actually got up there, it was, just packed with people, and also, like, the Eiffel Tower is big, but there's not a whole lot of room when you're on the different levels, and so like you're always shouldering past people, and just to get to the elevator that takes you to the next thing was another line that sort of wrapped around, and. So there was the Eiffel Tower. Actually, we went to Versailles, and that was a lot of people too. And then our first day in Venice, I just felt completely overwhelmed with people. And I think some of that too was because I was tired. We had to like take a train and then walk with all our luggage over a mile through the streets of Venice and get all that settled. Like all of the, and actually this is another good thing to bring up is when you take a trip like this, like you have to take into account the mental energy it's going to take to get there. Just that transportation, get all my stuff, get the family stuff, get it to the train, get on the train, make sure we have seats, make sure our seats don't have the same numbers as some other people, which we did on our first train ride from Rome to Tuscany. Like we all had the same seat numbers, and
oh man,
like that kind of stuff. And then taking your baggage and finding your hotel, like all that kind of stuff also bleeds into that excess of energy and attention. And so by the time we were settled and we could just go walking in Venice, it was the middle of the day and it was packed with people, and
you're exhausted.
I was exhausted and overwhelmed. One nice thing about Venice, which was a surprise to me, is that there would be big areas were just packed with people, but then like you take a little alley and like some of the alleys, like they're super tiny, and then you could go on another street and there's nobody.
Wow.
I just sort of expected it to be packed the whole time, but it's just sort of where like all the restaurants are and things like that. I can't remember my original point here again because of the jet lag. But it like the energy that it requires just to do all that, and then on top of that to think, okay, well now I'm in a place where I want to take some pictures, and how am I going to do that, and what's my expectation? Do I really want to try to do something artistic? And occasionally, especially when I had the little X100V, that was my release, because I could sort of stick it into a black and white mode, and just look for light and shadow, and that distracted me enough from the crowds and everything that I could have a little bit of focus, then come back out, kind of recharge. Even if a lot of those pictures are not anything that I will probably ever share,
right?
It was still that experience.
It's a little bit of phototherapy right there.
Phototherapy, yes, absolutely.
I think what's one of the lessons I picked up from all my trips, but this one, being a family trip involving a lot of miles and crowds of people and all of that, was if photography is a creative effort, and I think a lot of times effort's probably the right word, and you're just spent, you're exhausted, it's just not gonna work. Now I'm glad you're able to kind of push through that and get some photos despite that. There were several times on my trip where I was like, I'm just not happening today. And we did have a lot of weather. We had a lot of rain, and we had a lot of kind of low skies, so we didn't see the mountains and things like that. But when they did come out, being a family trip, and this is something we talked about on our trip planning episode, which is one of our earlier episodes.
Yeah.
Last year. But it's worth bringing up again, when you're traveling with your family and it's not a photography trip, you have to steal the moments, and we're usually, both of us, that means sunrise. You're going to get out early. Mm-hmm. And I found on this trip, that was very hard for me to do, because the vehicle I would use to get to the sunrise locations was the one we were all sleeping in.
Oh, right.
So I couldn't, in the campgrounds we were at, there wasn't really an opportunity for me to get up and go shoot the sunrise where I could walk somewhere. And there was one campground in particular that would have worked for a walking sunrise shoot. But that morning we decided to drive to Moraine Lake, which is probably the biggest photo hotspot in the Canadian Rockies. And the parking situation there, speaking of crowds, the parking situation is such that if you're not there by 5 a.m., you don't get in. You don't get to park there. And if you can't park there, you can't drive up the road. So once the parking lot's full, the rangers close the road 10 miles away, and you're not going to photograph sunrise over Moraine Lake unless you get there by 5 a.m. So we had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and drive there because we were an hour away. And so I didn't have any locations where I could just get out and make photos in the morning like I usually would on a family trip. And so I felt like the one time that I had that sunrise thing, I had to bring my family with me. I had to get them on board. And I felt a great deal of stress about that.
Yeah.
But the nice thing, I'll tell you, the nice thing about this camper van, we pulled up, we got our parking spot at Moraine Lake, and it was, 4 a.m. Got our parking spot at Moraine Lake. My kids crawled into bed with my wife. I closed all the curtains and shades in the van. I got all my gear. I quietly closed the door. And I went and photographed the sunrise for about 2.5 hours. I came back and they were still asleep.
Nice.
And so I made coffee very quietly, and I sat in the front and I drank my coffee and watched people walk by in the parking lot and drank my coffee. And I think I closed my eyes for like 5 minutes, and I woke up and I was like, I need to go get out and walk around a little bit. So I went on a little hike, took some more photos, kind of explored a little bit, and then came back and everybody was starting to wake up. I'm like, well, this worked out pretty well. I got to drive to my sunrise location, bring my whole family with me, and they still had the opportunity to sleep in, which was really, really nice for them. Not so great for me. I was really tired by the end of that day. But it's challenging. It's very hard to be creative when you're worried about all the stresses of travel, especially with you if you've got kids along that you're responsible for. All the stresses of, for me, a lot of times I end up planning our trips. And so a lot of stresses of, well, they're not having a good time, and that's my fault because that was my idea. Right. When I finally get through all of that, is there anything left over to make photos with as far as creative juices? And sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's best for me just to grab a glass of wine and sit down somewhere and read a book. So yeah, I think that was a lesson I learned on this trip, was just don't sweat it. If you can get that opportunity, get it. Otherwise, at one point I told my wife, I know where to come back to. And I definitely know not to try to be in Banff in June, in late June. Like you said, I think it wasn't quite the peak of the busy season, but it was certainly getting there. And everybody was talking about all the people that, the waiters and baristas and stuff I talked to, a lot of people are saying, yeah, it's going to be really busy this year. We're all kind of bracing ourselves because people finally get to travel again, and they've been pent up. And I'm like, well, that's us. We were waiting for a couple of years to do this trip. So, gosh, I think it's a challenge for us photographers when we're on the road to be able to make photos at good times, to make photos when you've got to do all the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this extends to just travel in general. Like, you see so many people who just get to the end of their freaking last nerve traveling, and like my outlook is always, the minute you set foot out of your house, like, you got to expect that something might go wrong, and patience will go so far. And there were a couple of times when, like for example, we had a tour booked for the Coliseum, to go into the Coliseum. And I also have to shout out here to my wonderful wife, because she's the planner in our family, and so she did so much work, and a lot of these things going to Europe. I don't know how it was years ago, but now, like, you really do need to get tickets for things weeks in advance. And so we had booked this tour. It was going to be like a 2-hour walking tour where we got to go inside the Coliseum, and well, the afternoon before, they sent an email saying, due to circumstances, this tour has been canceled today, which we didn't see until the morning of. We show up at their office and it's all closed, and then we go check the spam filters, and I guess we don't have tickets. And so we didn't actually get to go inside the Coliseum. So then it was a matter of, well, what are we going to do instead? And like, I think we ultimately had an okay day. Oh, by the way, I should mention, it was 100 degrees in Rome. And I'll get back to that in a second. But just that flexibility of, okay, something has gone sideways. What are we going to do instead? And we had two teenagers with us, so it was our family, the three of us, and then a friend of ours and her teenage son, who's a year older, and so we had a 15-year-old and a 14-year-old. And, in 100 degrees,
That's rough.
teenagers are just like, why are we here? And,
Yeah.
like hopping from shade to shade. And
Yeah.
can we have more gelato? And, like the whole bit. And yet, I don't look back and say, that wasn't a good day. So being flexible, oh my God. All right, going back to the temperature.
Yeah.
I have to praise you specifically for our episode on travel clothing, because based on a couple of your recommendations, I bought a couple of the REI T-shirts that wick away sweat, and basically I was able to handle being in 100-degree temperatures. So in Rome, it was actually up to 100 degrees. In the rest of Italy, it was in the like mid to high 90s, and in Venice, it actually was in the 80s, but it was really humid.
Right.
And so the entire time, I say this as someone who sits in front of a desk in an office most of the time.
In Seattle.
In Seattle, I don't think I have ever sweat as much for as long for as many days. And let me tell you, dear listener, wicking technology is amazing. So yeah, that made a huge difference. I only brought like 2 pairs of pants and maybe 4 shirts because we had to have size and weight restrictions. Actually,
Yeah.
We miscalculated the weight restrictions and ended up having to check bags that I thought we could carry on, which is one reason why, as of this morning, my suitcase is somewhere over Scotland.
Somewhere
on its way back to
Scotland,
here.
yeah.
Everyone else's suitcases made it just fine. It was mine didn't. And then one last thing related to that, because of these weight restrictions, I couldn't bring my Peak Design travel tripod in my bag. So the backpack that I brought is the Shimoda bag that we've talked about before. And I just couldn't do it. And so knowing that I would have to put my tripod into a checked bag, I said, you know what? The nice carbon fiber Peak Design one, that's just going to stay home. And I'm going to take I can't even remember how, like $200 3-legged thing.
Oh, yeah.
Travel tripod. And that worked out really well, because if my bag never reaches me, that's okay.
You
right?
can live without that tripod.
Yeah. I can live without that tripod. And having it was fine. And actually having the ball head was also good, because I did end up getting one of the platypods, which was the little plate. And that made a huge difference in places where I couldn't bring a tripod. So I only used my tripod really the mornings that I went out to shoot on my own.
Let's talk about the platypod, because I used, when I did my trip to Europe pre-pandemic, I went to a lot of castles and stuff in Denmark, and I used the platypod. I have the original, it's just a plate, just a metal plate with a stud that takes the ball head.
Yeah.
And I used it a lot on the floor in these castles, and I would actually sit down, kind of pick a room that wasn't crowded, and I would sit in the corner and set my camera up with a wide-angle lens and shoot these kind of long exposures in these rooms. And it worked really well for that. But what surprised me was there was oftentimes where I was wanting to set up to take a long exposure of a cityscape. There was a pole or a bench or a railing or something that I could attach to.
Mm-hmm.
And I also carry a little clamp that clamps onto things that a ball head can hook to.
Okay.
And I use that a lot. And my question would be, do you think you could have done this trip without a tripod at all?
Yes. Yes, I think so. Because, in fact, I'll share a panorama that I did when we were in Florence. I think it was Florence. See now like
That's all blurring together.
all the cities are blurring together. So there's this Palazzo Michelangelo that has this great view of Florence, and the sun comes down right there over the Alba River, and you've got the churches and the Duomo and all this. And I brought my tripod for that. This was the one where I decided that I would just go do the sunset, and the family said, "You go ahead and do that. We'd have no interest in it." And I managed to get there maybe an hour before sunset, and found myself a spot. And there's a railing, sort of a wide flat railing, and there were so many people there. I basically had to defend my spot, and and just not move, because to my right was like the optimal corner, but there were people who would take selfies, and then somebody else would come in and take selfies, and so I just had to sit right there. And I probably could have set up a tripod if I wanted to, but it was so much more convenient to just stick the platypod there with its little adjustable feet. And so then I was able to, once the sunset really started to happen, I just made a whole bunch of HDR panorama shots where I could just swivel on this ball head. And I'm pretty sure I took an iPhone photo of the setup that I can also share. And that was great because I was compact. I wasn't, sort of encroaching. It was funny because I'm taking pictures, then every once in a while, like a cell phone would just sort of appear over my shoulder as someone was taking a picture. But as long as I didn't move and relinquish my spot, it worked out okay.
Yeah.
But having that flexibility and not having to be, how to say this nicely, without being like one of those photographer guys. Right. Who's like, all right, I've got my tripod, I need my space and all that. There wasn't. I mean, there were people 5 deep behind me.
Wow.
And as long as I didn't look at them, I could just stick with my spot.
Pretend they were not there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a few lessons, if I can kind of put a bow on this. Expect crowds.
Expect crowds.
If you're going anywhere that's interesting, expect crowds. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe pack with just what you need, and not necessarily go big and bulky so that you don't have to check bags, right?
Yeah.
And if you do check a bag, put an air tag in it, right?
Yes.
Yep. So you can track it as it comes home to you.
That's how I know that it was over Scotland a couple hours ago.
In fact, I have air tags in all my backpacks and bags now. And so when I was telling you earlier, when I leave my car, if I leave anything in the car, it beeps, my watch goes, "Hey, you've left all these things behind." I'm like, I know, I can't bring everything every time.
Yeah.
And so, those things are all important. If you can squeeze some time out for yourself to make photos at any point, and still have the energy to do that, that's a gift. That's a gift when you're traveling with family, right?
Right. Well, and also I will add, the other side effect of that was, I think in all of these cases, when I either did a morning or the one sunset there, when I was done and everything's packed away, and then just like that nice sense of, and in my case, I had to walk back everywhere. So it was usually about a mile and a half walk each way. And those were times when I just had the city to myself. I mean, obviously I had all sorts of other people, but then I was done being the photographer, and I didn't have to, figure out where my family was going and plan dinner and all that. I had those little windows of, walking across the Seine and, just sort of strolling under the Eiffel Tower when there was no other expectation. And there are a few times like that. I mean, one of my best times was walking from that palazzo in Florence back to our hotel, because like it was the sun had gone down, and it had finally cooled off. And so I just, I got a soda and I walked and just had this like nice blissful experience.
Wow.
So, like also make a point of doing those kind of things too. Especially if you're like us, like we tend to be introverts, and so being around so many people just takes up so much energy.
It does. It's incredibly exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised. Again, it's a broken record, but I was surprised and I shouldn't have been, that deep in the mountains of Canada, that I would be surrounded by people almost everywhere I went.
Yeah.
If I'd gone on a trail and truly hiked somewhere off the beaten path, I'm sure I could have found solitude, but we just didn't have many of those moments on this particular trip.
Right.
So.
Right.
But sounds like you had some nice times, quiet times in the morning. I love the mornings for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know me, I'm such a morning person.
Yeah, you're such a morning person.
But when I'm traveling, I make an exception, and it mostly always paid off. So, and I would say I don't have any serious regrets that I can think about or that I can recall right now. Surprisingly, I think I took the right amount of gear, even though I felt like I had a lot. And that was also because, like for example, I took a drone with me, and
that's right.
I was able to fly my drone just like literally twice in Tuscany, but I sold my own drone, my old drone, and I bought a DJI Mini 2 that was nice and small and compact, and so like I knew that I would have a lot of stuff, but the only thing that comes to mind that I did not use at all was a battery charger for my little Fuji batteries, because I also have like one of these little Nightcore USB based chargers.
Okay.
I brought this, and I had bought another one that came with some others, and this was all I needed to do my charging.
Well, and you can also charge both of the drone and your cameras with USB-C, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did that a couple times too.
Yeah, I find that just plugging my camera in at night, just plug it in, top it off. Worked really well on this trip. I didn't have any battery struggles, which is good. I didn't shoot a lot either, but yeah. Anyway, I think we did pretty well for a couple of world travelers who hadn't world traveled in a while.
Yeah, seriously.
We both made it home, so that's good.
Both made it home. My luggage will hopefully make it home before this podcast gets posted.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope it gets there today.
So now I am curious. I would love to hear from our listeners. What you're doing or what you have done this summer. If you have any photographic travel or anything like that, because I'm on the back end of this trip. I have a ton of photos to edit, and I want to know what everybody else is doing too.
Yeah, I do too. I want to know what lessons learned from people. Let's gather this wisdom together. So, with this show, as always, on our website, photocombobulate.com, we're going to have a show notes page, and I'll have a form on there. So if you want to drop us a message about any travel plans you have or any trips you've taken this summer and anything you learned from those trips, we would love to hear from you. Always, we want to hear from you. That if you've taken the time to listen to this, we care very much about what you think and what you're thinking about. So check us out at photocombobulate.com. We're also in all the social media spots, Instagram, Facebook, all those places. The show will be comes out on this coming Wednesday, and then we are looking downrange at our schedule. So if you have any ideas for topics that you would like us to cover, this is the time to give us some tips, because we're kind of gathering up some plans. So fill out that form. Let us know. There's always a contact us form on our website where you can reach out, or any of the social medias. Just reach out to us. I had one of our listeners reach out through LinkedIn, which was a new for me.
Oh.
I was like, wow,
Nice.
I didn't think about that one. So yeah, seek us out, and we would love to hear from you. You are part of the family here. So.
Yeah. And, travel photography, traveling is such a big topic. If there's something that we did not discuss today that you're hoping to hear about, let us know, because there's so much that we could drill down into. Such is the nature of photocombobulating these topics.
They tend to get even more discombobulated. So I'm going to include some photos from my trip. We will definitely get Jeff's photos once he gets them. The ones that he's got processed now. I don't know if we'll get all of them because this comes out in a couple days.
I have a few.
But we'll get some stuff up, and you can check those all out on our show notes page. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Next time, after I go to sleep for many hours.
Yeah. Ciao, Vita.
Ciao.